Thank you very much, Greg Peters of Netflix. Let's begin with two bits of news from this week. Well, the first one is you've just announced this huge fight with Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford. And it's not your first big sort of live stream. You did the Mike Tyson fight. You've had the NFL games over Christmas Day. But everyone is looking at Netflix and asking the question, is this part of a bigger push into sports and into live events?
Well, it's definitely a bigger push into live events, and I would say we're super excited about the Canelo-Crawford fight because it represents one of the most amazing boxing matches, and we think it'll be as exciting as some of the top matches you've ever seen.
Do you have an idea about what the audience might be?
Well, we've got our internal estimates for it, but I would say based on our ability to internally estimate the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul audience, which we were about a quarter of what we actually ended up having. Maybe our estimates aren't as good as they could be, but we think it's going to be quite big, I think, and that's the most important part. And quite big globally, too, because Canelo's obviously got an amazing following in Mexico, and so we'll have some Latin American viewers as well. But to your main question, we do think about this as more of an event strategy rather than a sports strategy per se. So we want to try and do kind of big buzzy events that people are talking about, that they enjoy watching, and then reliving the stories about together. And we think that that's something we can add as value to our subscribers. But we also, and we love sports, to be clear. We would love to have Premier League and American football and many things. And we do carry the American football games on Christmas, and we're going to do World Cup coming up. But we also want to make sure that we are doing this in a profitable way, and so us, being very disciplined about what events that we go after, and making sure that we are not, paying too much for, let's say, a whole season, of a league. That's the kind of balance that we're seeking to strike.
So you're not going to bid on packages of UFC or Major League Baseball or even Formula One, which sometimes, occasionally, you hear your name being mentioned in these moments.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, of course, everyone would love us to be a bidder. It's good to have multiple bidders coming in. And F1 we have a special relationship with because of Drive to Survive, which we love. But I would say until we find a way to do something bigger in a way that we think is sustainably profitable, that's really the crux of it. We've done it with WWE, which is an example where we did a long-term deal where we felt like, if we help grow this property, we get to benefit as well as they get to benefit. So that might be a model, but we've got to really figure out those models that we can remain disciplined around.
So you're more likely to go for a kind of newer sport, if I can put it that way?
Well, perhaps. I don't necessarily know that that's the case. I mean, certainly us finding opportunities with leagues to take particular games that we can eventize, we can do something special around it. The American football games that we did on Christmas Day, we did Beyonce with as well, which was, I think made it more of an event, more special as a result. So those are the kind of opportunities that we're definitely looking for. Things that, if we can help grow the viewership of the sport through those activities, that's good for the league as well. So that typically an opportunity to find a good deal around it. So it's just finding those specific instances that really work in that model.
Do you think the old model of sports is dead? That it might move more? The thing you're talking about is a more kind of event, individual game almost model.
Well, I wouldn't certainly say that the old model is dead, and I think there's ample bidders for these properties that we see. But I would say it's not. It doesn't. We don't know a way to make it work for us in that specific way, and I think we're enthusiastic about trying to figure that out over a period of time. But to be very clear, we want to make sure that the properties that we bid for work for our business as well as for the league and for our members.
The idea, though, that you are the most profitable and you're not that interested in it, I think is interesting. On that subject, the other thing that happened this week is we saw Warner Brothers Discovery spinning off its cable channels. A huge thing in your industry. What's your reaction to that, and what does that tell you about the industry?
Well, I think we're going through an evolution, and we're sort of getting to the next phase of maturity where the market participants are trying to figure out, given the new reality, sort of what consumers expect from the business. Everything is moving to streaming. Everything is moving to on demand. It's very clear that consumers want that. Then they have to rationalize their business for that reality, and we're definitely seeing, the results of that. And I think these are sort of, inevitable, long predicted, long forecasted changes. So there's going to be a period of shakeout and transition associated with that. I'd say I feel we were lucky, I would say, in the fact that we came into this new ecosystem starting with the new model, so we don't actually have some of the complexities or difficulties of having to navigate through the transition because we've got a legacy business model. So that just makes it a little bit easier for us.
Do you expect to see mergers between these legacy players?
I think that's there's an inevitable logic to that, and then you get to every merger is a unique opportunity, and sometimes it presents interesting complexities. There's regulatory complexities that often are the case, and then there's the two companies have got to decide it makes sense for them to go do it. And there's lots of I should note that the track record around doing these large media mergers is maybe not amazing. There's some good examples out there, but there's some not necessarily great ones. And so, I think folks want to think long and hard about whether or not they're in a position to do it well.
So Netflix would likely not be a player in buying some of these things.
I think we have an obligation to explore all of the opportunities that are in front of us. So it's our responsibility.
And then reject them.
It's our responsibility to do good due diligence, but then also to have a cold, hard, disciplined look at, do we think we could do this well? And I would just say, like our track record is we're builders, we're not buyers. And so we're not particularly great at acquiring companies. It's not like sort of a demonstrated practice or capability that we've built. So I think we should bring that, perspective into how we think about these as well.
In terms of competition, though, do you think about the other streamers as competition, or how much do you now think of YouTube as the competitor?
Well, I would say we think that we're in a massively competitive environment, right? And we've got competition from traditional media, we've got competition from new streamers, Amazon, Apple, et cetera. We've got competition from UGC products, user-generated products like YouTube, like TikTok, sort of everything. Games is obviously a source of competition. Increasingly we see YouTube as a pretty strong competitor for time and attention. They're doing a good job at accumulating that, and we think our response and our job is to make sure that we're making sure that it's distinct and clear the job that we do in the entertainment ecosystem, both for creators in terms of giving them the resources required to produce amazing stories. And a platform to give a big audience for that. And then also, obviously, then for consumers and our members, which is to give them a particular kind of storytelling that they don't see on YouTube, but also make sure that we are expanding that portfolio in the places that we think we can operate, and expanding the ease of access and the ease of being able to engage in those stories in a way that gives them an experience which is also competitive with what YouTube is offering them.
I mean, your co-CEO, Ted Sarandos, famously said, YouTube is a place where people go to kill time. Netflix is where people spend time. But there's some signs that you're slightly reconsidering that YouTube does seem to be a place which is beginning to compete with you slightly more directly.
Yeah, I think they're trying to move up, frankly, and our job is to defend that space. And so how do we think about that? One of the ways we do that is we think that YouTube is a place where, great storytellers can emerge, and great storytellers that are doing the kind of storytelling that we think that we're good at. And our job should be to say, hey, we think Netflix is a great place for you to go and tell those kind of stories in a different way that our model supports that they might not be able to do on a YouTube, let's say. So that's an example of a place to be competitive. We're also trying to be competitive and trying to think about an evolution of our member experience in ways that there's a broader range of content that we can offer that still feels like Netflix content, what you'd expect to get from us, but also in ways that just make it easier to get into that space. Because I think one of the things that we see is sometimes there's immense value put on getting into a deeply engaging story, and that has a tremendous amount of payoff, and you can see that in the economics or in our business model. Folks are willing to pay for that. But also sometimes that can seem like a hurdle to get into, right? And so, we want to broaden that space and make it a little bit easier every year.
On the 7 streaming services at the moment, do you expect that number to come down? If we met each other in 3-4 years, would you expect that to be down to fewer?
I generally look at the way the internet works, and it tends to sort into sort of 2 buckets, right? Which is, there's a lot of benefits on scale, and so that would argue that number probably should be smaller. There's also, a space that exists where very targeted, very, niche services can operate at great, lower cost, but, sort of can be quite effective as well. So my guess is that's where we land.
one of the joys of your life at the moment, which you probably didn't anticipate before, is things like tariffs. We have Donald Trump coming to you and now saying he wants to put 100% tariffs on foreign production coming to the US. You make a lot of stuff around the world, and I suspect you would be more affected than most. What's your strategy on that?
Well, we're sort of waiting for a specific proposal. We haven't actually seen any details yet, so it's hard to respond specifically in absence of those details. So we're in sort of standby mode, and as soon as we see something, then we can comment more fully.
Do you worry about entertainment getting wrapped up in much bigger quarrels with China, all those sort of things?
Well, I think that entertainment is a universal product in the sense that all humans want to be told stories. So I definitely see that as a strong reason for optimistic perspective on the industry. And then we've always had to, I think about storytelling as also having a highly local component, right? Which is, there's very different cultural perspectives and perspectives of storytellers, and mostly our job is to try and give storytellers around the world in multiple different places, multiple different languages, the opportunity to tell their stories. And that wealth and diversity of perspective has served us quite well. So I think that's how we think about it.
So you would still continue with it pretty much regardless, but because you need that local content for other places in the world.
That's right. I mean, local consumers want to hear authentic stories from the place and culture that they exist in, and then sometimes those stories become large global phenomena as well. And we definitely think that you have to start local and tell that authentic story, and then if you do that really, really well, sometimes that's the thing that goes global.
What happens in terms of AI? There's been a lot of fuss about how maybe AI can change the way that films and TV is produced. What would you expect to change most over the next couple of years?
Well, I would say there's a long gap between what you can see in a demo and sort of what you get to when you actually have to put something in production and really have predictable outputs. So we're definitely in that space where there's a lot of work that goes on. But we're seeing tools, especially tools that help creators in the sort of non-production part of the process. So this is pre-visualization, or shot composition, things that work in that regard. But I think that gets to really our perspective on what AI will do, which is it'll give an increasingly effective set of tools that still has the creator at the center, because I would very much believe that storytelling it's a hard thing to go do. It's a unevenly and rare commodity in the distribution of humans in the planet, and great storytellers will still be at the center of creating great stories.
When you look at the value in Netflix, where is it? Is it that subscriber base? Is it the IP? What is the bit that you most want to defend?
Well, I would say we're trying to build more and more value in the IP that we have. We're relatively young in that regard, right? So if you look at our traditional media peers, they have much
enormous libraries,
and sort of much more valuable, let's say, IP catalog. But then I think, if you look at our track record, we've only been doing this, for a little bit over a decade, right? And we've, got some properties that we're quite excited. If you think about Stranger Things as an example, we've got, season 2 of Wednesday coming out. These are all examples of, us building IP. But, largely what I'd say is that we've got over 500 million people on the planet who come to us to seek to be entertained. And our job is to fulfill that, and if we do a good job, that's quite a valuable business.
There's been a slight shift, though, in the kind of business model away. It was all about growing subscribers, and that's what everyone always focused on every quarter. Now there's a little bit more about profits, returns, and one obvious way in which you could become even more profitable is to put up prices. So I wonder to what extent could that be part of the strategy going forward?
Yeah, and we've long had the perspective that it was smart in the business to sort of always grow margin a little bit, every year, because that was sort of building in that discipline about just how we wanted to build a more successful business was important. So we've been doing that for quite some time. And then we've got a couple different levers to go do that. Obviously, growing subscribers is one of those. We continue to go do that. Being able to raise prices because we've delivered more value to those subscribers, and we think that it's appropriate to go back and ask them to pay a little bit more so that we can reinvest into actually improving the value of the services. Another one, but we've also got increasingly other ones too. We've got advertising we've added to the mix as well, and so now we have the opportunity to work with amazing brands around the world and give them the capability to tell the story about the products and services that they are delivering to consumers on the planet that are interested, because we're targeting increasingly and getting better at personalizing those ad experiences. So I'd say, we're just, as many businesses do, we're getting increasingly sophisticated and having more of those levers at hand to try and continue to do what we're going to do, which is build a better and better business every year.
How much pricing power, though, do you think you have? Do you have the pricing power conceivably to double fees? Just to give you an example, it's much easier to double the subscription fee than to double the number of subscribers.
Well, it depends on what country we're talking about, actually, I would say. And so we think about that answer as very different around different countries around the world. And to be clear, we believe that there's there's hundreds of millions of Netflix capable households that have everything that they need to sign up that aren't currently signed up yet. So we've got a lot of work to go do there as well. But we don't have an a priori position on this, and we really think about this as an interaction with consumers, with our members, where we look for signals that we've delivered more value, and it's an appropriate time to ask them to pay a bit more. That's the thing that governs how we actually think about changing prices.
And in terms of the other way of growing business, which you said is to get those subscribers, is that now something that is moving much more to Asia, say, than Europe? I think Europe is your biggest market at the moment.
I would say one we
put it together.
Yeah, we put it together. We believe there's a subscriber growth pretty much in every country that we operate in. So it's not as if we feel like we're done growing anywhere at this point in time. But to your point, if we look at the sort of the open opportunity, the TAM available to us, there's a lot in Asia. We're just younger in Asia. We've got more work to go do to improve the offering there. We think about oftentimes in countries you start at a center in terms of the content and the offering and how it's presented to market, and then you start to expand out, and there's many countries that we've got a lot more room to grow in Asia.
And just to be a little bit more specific on that, are there particular countries in Asia that you're targeting? Is it across the whole region?
Well, there's tons of opportunity there. So I would say we first launched in Japan. That's probably the furthest along in that sort of evolution.
Where you were based for
I had the great honor to launch the service there and get us rolling. Korea, is another great example. I think we're making good progress. India, we've seen good acceleration in subscriber growth there as we get more.
Can you charge the same kind of fees in India that you can elsewhere? Subscription normally there is much cheaper. Yeah,
and we do think of pricing as a very local, country-specific situation. So we charge different fees there, and to your point, they're lower in India as well. But I would say there's tons of growth all throughout Asia, and there's tons more work for us to go do.
Is that a really big difference between you and the other streaming services? Is that you do tend to be more global? Amazon maybe as well. Apple's a bit patchy. You've got these other people are behind you. Certainly the standard old Hollywood ones.
Well, I would say in terms of that set, we're the most global, and there's part of being global is being available for consumers around the world. But also being available, there's a deep set of what does that mean? Are you good at payments in the market? Do you have many local partners? Our partnerships in all these markets run incredibly deep, and which is important to making sure that the service is available, accessible to members. But a big part of also being global is the content offering, right? And so we produce in more than 50 countries around the world. Productions, and so that's critical to making sure that we've got the right kind of stories that those local members want to hear.
One last thing, just if you look at your standard Netflix screen, we're all very used to it.
Yep.
Is that going to change at all?
Well, we did just actually roll out a pretty significant change to it, where we've been working on this for a while, where we've had the same essentially UI structure, user interface structure, for almost 10 years, and now we've just come up with a new one, which we think will set up the business for the next 10 years worth of innovation. It supports new content types effectively. So we mentioned all the live things that we're doing, like that Canelo Crawford fight. It'll do a better job at letting people know that this fight's coming, and then they can remember and be able to watch it in time. Games is another interesting space for us, where we'll actually be able to deliver more games to the TV. So that's an exciting. And then there's just tons of look and feel improvements, and also one of the main benefits is that this new user interface will be able to respond dynamically to what you want in the moment, right? So we definitely see that not only do we personalize as we do today, so your Netflix looks different than my Netflix, but you probably have different needs from Netflix in the moment, right? So whether that's Sunday afternoon, maybe with the family around the TV versus Thursday night by yourself, those, we want to make sure that the UI is doing that specific job very, very well.
So we're going to end up with a more kind of personalized Netflix. Could it be the place where actually the thing we've always looked for on the news side is to try and personalize news people have tried and failed? Do you think entertainment is the place where we might see that first?
Well, I would say we're already highly personalized, right? So the title selection that you and I get,
what you've been watching and so on.
That'll be very different for you and I. We actually present titles differently in a personalized way. So even if we get maybe the same story, let's say Black Doves, incredible story, you might have a connection to that story that might be different than mine, so the assets that we use to present that should be personalized and specific in that way. But then this next step with the new user interface is that we actually want the form and function of the UI to be personalized as well, so that it is tailored and optimized to doing the job that you need in your particular moment versus a different moment that you show up, or versus what I need in any other moment.
Greg Peters, thank you very much. We could spend a long time discussing how Black Doves would be different for both of us, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have you back.